Hello, how's everyone doing today? I'm here with Amy Leandros. Amy Lee works with the Independent Institute and is a seasoned friend of Liberty. She started as at the Young Americans for Liberty chapter at CSU Sacramento, worked with the Libertarian Party in Sacramento County, and worked on the Berman for Congress campaign. How are you doing?
Doing great. How are you, Daniel?
I'm good. So I guess let's have a little background. So I'm not sure how libertarian you are. Are you anarchist or are you not there yet?
I guess I would consider myself to be a minarchist. I do think that there's some, room for government and small doses.
Okay.
I think that the government is should be there. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. I think the government should be there to remove coercion from the market, and otherwise, I think that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's realistic?
No,
do you think government has any incentive to do that?
Well, I guess that's why I haven't made the full leap to become a philosophical anarchist, is because I think that practically speaking, we're always going to have some kind of form of government, and it's always going to be larger and more oppressive than we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I think that's right, but I'm a realist, and I'm also like to see things from a holistic point of view. So as much as I am dedicated to advancing principles of liberty, and I do consider myself a small L libertarian, I think that, the government is kind of this necessary evil, or maybe an unnecessary evil that we're just kind of stuck with.
Mm-hmm. I guess, yeah, well, first of all, I don't know if, I think all human inventions are not inevitable. I mean, certain things are inevitable. The law of gravity, we're all going to die. None of us can flap our hands and fly. Certain laws of nature are inevitable. But I think any institution that humans create, they can destroy, right?
Absolutely. But isn't it when, even when you're just forming together with 2 or 3 of your friends voluntarily, and you're deciding to go out to which bar, and you say, well, I don't know which bar I want to go to, and they say, I don't know which bar I want to go to, but then one person, it becomes the leader and decides which bar to go to. In that sense, there's this natural government that just emerges from the social order.
Yeah, that's not a government. I mean, right? A government would be, we're going to this bar, you're going to pay for what you order, and if you refuse to do so, we're going to beat you up, right? I mean, if you go to a bunch of friends to go to some bar and they say, we can't decide who should make the decision, so let's just decide on one of us to make the decision, and we'll abide by that. You don't have to abide by that. You could say, I changed my mind. I don't know if that's really a government.
Well, no, okay, so I guess you're right. The government needs to have, I guess, some other kind of pre-existing conditions, like you're saying, kind of these rules of law and order. But I think that leadership arises out of kind of the natural order of the way that we form ourselves in our social contracts.
All right. So since you're advocating a minarchy, how do we get government down to a tumor instead of a cancer?
Well, I think places like New Hampshire get it right, where they have a large representative body of their people, whereas places like, our hometown, or my home state of California, our representation is grossly disproportionate. I think that's one way we do it. We pass laws to get rid of bad laws, which seems kind of, backwards, but you have to write a law to unwrite a law. I think that's one way we do it. And I also think that we do it by taking personal responsibility and, maybe even going off the grid or seceding in our own kind of anarchist ways.
All right. So you support secession?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Although,
sorry, what?
I was going to say.
Go ahead.
I don't think necessarily that it's realistic because it's not in the federal government's I guess favor to allow for a state to secede. But I do think that it would be better for states to claim their own sovereignty versus being tied against our own will.
Mm-hmm. Do you support secession down to the individual?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you are an anarchist. That was a quick conversation.
I don't like these labels.
Oh, you're what Stefan Kinsella would call a non-labeler.
I'm a part of the no label.
Right, you're a non-labeler. Those are the people who don't like to be labeled. Okay, cool. So let's talk about, I guess, well, what's the best way to do that? You say, have people more active, but I mean, to me, I think the most practical thing is just bigger and bigger government. I don't see government shrinking. I see government growing more and more and more, right?
Right.
I don't see any reduction in government as practical. I mean, maybe I'm just being cynical here, but...
So you want the government to take care of us all from cradle to grave and to employ everybody and to redistribute the wealth and get rid of the middle class?
No, I don't care if something's practical or not. To me, what's practical is irrelevant to what I advocate. I think having a society where no one murders is think that we need limited murder or that some murder is necessary. So just because something is practical doesn't mean it's just. So to me, practicality is sort of irrelevant.
Okay, I can see what you're saying here. I guess, we were discussing earlier kind of what topics we wanted to chat about tonight, and on your list was abortion. And I know this is kind of a hard-hitting topic, but I guess that this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I would consider myself not to be pro-abortion, but I am for a woman's right to choose. I don't think that we should be going out and advocating for everyone to use abortion as their form of birth control or as even necessarily the right thing for every woman to do. But I do think having access to safe abortion, clinics or female reproductive clinics is important because otherwise we will see women going in back alleys and having abortions done, before Roe versus Wade was passed, we were seeing women dying from backroom abortions all the time. And, another thing is that I think it's important to emphasize the actual, the potential life versus the actual life, right? I mean, I would never advocate or tell my best friend to go get a late-term abortion. But I do think abortions that are done at an early stage where there is just a potential, like a very small potential life or potential human life is different than having a late-term abortion. And I also think that, we need to place the emphasis on, accepting people for their decisions and coming from a place of, what's the word I'm looking for? We need to respect people for their decisions because we don't know what led them to have to make that choice. And unless you're put in their position, you will never know why they made the choice that they have. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you were talking about like this whole practical versus, I guess, what was your point? The practical versus the reality of the situation? Was that what it is, or?
I mean, first of all, I don't know. First of all, I don't even know what's practical necessarily. I think people often use the word practical simply to maintain the status quo and say, oh, that's not practical, so they don't even try to advocate for it. So I'm not even sure, if you can even define what practical is. I think it's a very obscured and very subjective concept that can be made just to manipulate people. So I don't like that word. I don't like the word pragmatic either, but my main point is that I think it's important to advocate for things that are ethical. What will occur and what's ethical, I think, are two different things. I'm not saying anarchy will occur. I'm saying that the initiation of the use of force is not justified. The government inherently, by its very nature, initiates the use of force. Hence, government is unjustified. That's it. I'm not concerned with whether we're going to have anarchy or whether we won't. We probably won't, but that doesn't mean that government in any form is justified.
So even a government that is legitimate and fulfills the rights of the social contract that it makes with its people is impractical or is unjust?
I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, to me, the only way to have a social contract is if you have a bunch of people write their John Hancock. People know exactly who the representatives are. I mean, in government, you don't have that. You have a secret ballot, so the people in office don't even know who voted for them. And the social contract, I'm not sure what's in it. I mean, most of the times when I hear about a social contract, it seems like a one-way. Government has all this power. They can do whatever they want. They can alter the contract at will, and I'm sort of stuck to follow it. It's not a concrete contract with my signature at the bottom, with my approval at the bottom. I mean, if every single person says, I agree with this, I wouldn't call that a government. I would just call that a mutual defense corporation.
But don't you know the line of argument of the implicit contract that because you live here and you take advantage of the provisions that are given to you, or the, I guess, you know, you live here and you work here and you abide by our rules, and because that's kind of how you're acting within society, you're implicitly agreeing to the contract, and therefore you need to follow the rules of the contract. Now, I guess I'm taking more of a devil's advocate position on this because I'm right there with you. You know, you're not consenting to it. You don't know what laws are passed. Shoot, the legislatures don't even know what's going into the laws that they're passing. You know, we have a runaway train of a government right now, especially at the federal level, but it all trickles down even to, you know, as small as the county or, you know, your city council board. It's just way too powerful, and it's part of the problem is that we think that our government, not we, but a lot of people think that our government officials are immune from, you know, these human conditions that we all suffer from, whether it's greed or you know, being influenced or what have you. And these people are just going out and making laws that we have no representation. We aren't represented. It's just their bidding, whatever they want to do, and their vote is usually for sale from some kind of lobbyist. So.
Yeah, and I think the problem, and I'm not sure if you're interested in having this conversation. We can say the topic soon, but I mean, I think the problem was saying by living here you agree with the rules. There are really two problems with that. One, if a government is justified because by living here you agree to the rules, everyone is consistent with North Korea, are staying in North Korea, therefore they agree to be treated the way they're treated, and because they're not leaving. The Jews could have left Nazi Germany. The Jews who decided to stay didn't, therefore they consented, and it was just a big mass suicide like in Jonestown. So I think the problem was saying that by living here you agree to the rules justifies any government on earth because someone is always living in some government. Second, that response by its very notion implies that the governments are the owner of this place, because only the owner of a place gets to decide what the rules are. I have a right to say, in my house, you can take off my shoe. You have to take off your shoes, and if you don't like it, leave my home, because it's my home, and in my home those are my rules, and if you don't like it, leave. But I don't have the right to say you can't wear shoes in your own home, or I can't say this is my neighborhood, and by living in my neighborhood you agree to follow the rules, and the rules are no wearing shoes in your own home.
Right. Well, I don't think that the line of argument of implicit consent is justifying of all governments. Well, insofar as that, if you can't make a rule, you know, about my home, but if I have a rule in my home that I observe, or if I have, okay, like for instance, I guess this comes up a lot with like religious freedoms. I read recently that this young woman was suing some clothing company because she was passed over for a position because she wore her headscarf into her interview, or that's why she's suing them, because she believes that she was passed up because of her headscarf, right? And so I guess because she came into that situation, the one-on-one, there was no implicit consent or implicit law that would say, by her entering that conversation or that interview, that she would be not privy to being able to express her religious freedom. But maybe the rule of the organization was that no headscarves are allowed. But because that rule was not communicated, I guess she was, passed over for the job, right? Or there was no communication. But okay, so all of that aside, that's really what this implicit contract or this implicit consent is. That, I think that point right there that I just made, the communication, is really where we need to focus on. We're not communicating, the governments aren't communicating to the people what the laws are or how they need to conduct themselves, and so the people are feeling unsure about how to react or how to live in the world or what laws to abide, but yet the government is holding them accountable for laws that they don't know exist or don't know how to operate in the system under, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's certainly true. That's why when you hear these tyranny apologists say, well, if you don't break the law if you don't want to get in trouble. How do you expect me to know what the laws are? There are so many. They change all the time. I certainly agree with that. Anyway, let's talk about. And we're going to talk about peaceful parenting. You said you heard about that recently. What are your thoughts on that?
I wish my parents had peaceful parenting classes.
Sorry to hear that.
Well, I mean, I think it is just what it is. I don't know. Were you spanked as a child, Daniel?
No.
I wasn't spanked either, but I think one of the main highlights of peaceful parenting is, setting expectations for your children and providing structure for them. Kids need structure. They thrive under structure. I still crave structure as an adult. I need to set timelines and expectations for myself in order to be successful. And so when we bring children into this world, I think we forget the disconnect of how they're absorbing all of the stimulus that's around them, and we're not treating them like tiny human beings. We're treating them like almost like we now I'm probably going to outrage someone. It's almost like we treat our children like they're like pets, or we're not. And this isn't a. I'm doing like a very general blanket statement. Of course, there are people who are exceptions, and there are people who want to be active parents in their lives. But peaceful parenting has to do with setting expectations and structure for your children, and responding with empathy and with understanding, and helping them figure out and navigate life's difficulties with a rational perspective. We all want to lash out at kids. I'm not a parent, and so I'm not like the world's authority to be talking on this, but I did help raise my nephew, and I do have friends with children, so I am around children a lot. There are times where I want to reach out and, put my hands on a child. But that's not the right thing to do, because what they're learning how to react in the world is how you show them they need to be acting in the world. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on peaceful parenting?
No, I agree with that. I think a lot of times children mimic, their behavior. I remember when I was a kid, if I would, accidentally spill wine at the dinner table or something, my father would say, go to your room. And, if he spilled wine by accident when I was younger, I would say, hey, Dad, go to your room. So, a lot of times children, copy the the behavior of their parents. So I think when you spank your child, that leads to further aggression. I think that it's a sign of incompetence. Violence, aggression is always a sign of incompetence. It's saying I don't know how to be a parent. It's saying I'm incapable of being persuasive, and I have to use violence. And when you have to use violence, you're saying I'm bad at what I do. Otherwise, you would be able to reason with someone, right? A person who rapes is confessing, I am a bad lover. If I was a good lover, I wouldn't have to go around raping people. So I think that spanking children is a confession that I don't know what I'm doing, I'm a shitty parent, and that I should not have this job.
Well, I can't say that if you spank your child, you're a shitty parent, because I think that there are a lot of externalities that go on, in the moment. But I think that, it's really hard sometimes to reason with, use your logic when you're dealing with someone who has none. And that's why I think it's really, and because children, they're very emotional, and they may be bright and smart, but a lot of times they're just not, they're not fully capable rational beings. And so it's really hard to exercise your logic with someone who isn't acting logical. So that's when you have to really be well versed in responding with empathy and kindness, and also being principled. And so I think peaceful parenting and libertarianism go very hand in hand, insofar that the non-aggression principle, treat others the way that you want to be treated, use the golden rule, and try and remove I guess, like Eckhart Tolle, I'm reading The Power of Now right now, and he talks a lot about removing the person from the thoughts and the emotions. So the thinking me, the observing me, is the person seeing that I'm getting flustered or anxious or nervous right now, or I'm having a hard time formulating the right words to say. But that's not actually me. The me is me observing the me, and this is just getting really metaphysical. But ultimately, you have to be able to separate yourself in that moment, and it's really difficult. And I haven't had too many experiences with it because I haven't raised a child. But I don't think it's fair for us to say you're a bad person for spanking your child. But I think that we need to explore and advocate for avenues that not only promote the well-being of the child, but also promote the well-being of the parent. Because when you're spanking the child, you're not acting in a way that is promoting your highest being, or who you want to be. I don't think anyone wants to spank their child or lose their temper at their child. But we need to develop alternative paths and solutions for promoting wellness of both the parent and the children.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I mean, just one comment you said. I mean, one of the reasons that people spank is that children are irrational beings. But I would say if that's true, then spanking makes no sense, because part of being a rational being is acting in ways that go against your interests and being able to understand cause and effect and the consequences of actions. If a child is irrational, then they won't be able to understand I get hit, and they'll just think it's random. So if children are not truly capable of reasoning, they won't reason behind why they got spanked. So I think the fact that a child lacks reason is not a justification.
I didn't say that they lacked reason. I said that they're not a fully developed rational being. They are still able to have thoughts and to discern and to make choices and draw causal chains in their mind. But they're not really able to see when you knocked over the wine glass, or when I was a kid and I was with my mom at Kmart and I found a ring on the ground and I put it on my finger, I didn't see that as being something that was wrong. I just found something on the floor and put it on my finger. And so when she yelled at me and got in my face for stealing, you know, I had no idea. All I remember is Mom yelling at me, you know. So I wasn't able to make those connections. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've heard a lot is, you know, when it fires, it wires, which is goes to like a brain chemistry and a neural path, I guess, analogy. When you do an action, you know, it's reinforcing a pathway, a neural pathway. And when you repetitively do actions, whether it's, you know, stealing or, you know, spanking your kid, this pathway becomes reinforced, and it's harder to undo the pathway the older you get, and, you know, the less times that you have the chance to, you know, try something else.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree with that. And no, I certainly agree. You know, saying you're a bad person for spanking, I mean, I don't know if that's even helpful. I mean, are they going to look inward and change, or are they just going to be defending or insulted? So I don't know how does that make difference that would be in influencing behavior. So activism. Do you what do you think about activism? Do you think that that is a way to achieve our goals? Is it destructive? Is it a waste of time? Is it useful?
well, you know, I come from the background of being a political activist, and it was actually one of my biggest dreams was to come to college and become a political activist, and I can say that I've done that, and I worked on a campaign, and now I'm more like in the academic, you know, side of, I guess, political activism. And I was actually just having this conversation with my friend Chet Hubbard earlier today, and we were saying, you know, there's so many great student leaders and passionate people in organizations like Young Americans for Liberty and other student activist groups who are out there, you know, pounding the pavement, knocking doors, trying to get elected, or people elected that they believe are kind of their ideological counterparts or their philosophical counterparts. And there's less work being done on the policy front. We're electing officials who we're hoping are going to be able to discern which is the right kind of policy to pass or not. But we're putting a lot of faith in those political saviors. I don't think it's necessarily a waste of time, but I'm very disillusioned with our political system, and I personally don't want to go out and advocate for any politician myself, but I will support any one of my friends who does want to go out and do that, because it's a very self-sacrificing kind of position to be in. But I do think that we need to work harder, especially as politically active young people, to get involved in influencing policy directly. And that means, you know, doing the research, I guess forming organizations that can aid legislators by, you know, whether that's drafting legislation themselves or doing the research to back it. We need to be on that front as well. But, you know, when it comes down to it, the biggest political activists are the lobbying groups. And, you know, our group at SFL, I think this year was 1,700 people. That feels, you know, if every single one of those students that were there went out and campaigned for their hometown legislator or their congressman or whatever, it would still not be as effective as, you know, 1,700 lobbyists. And so we somehow need to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, do you think it's important to try to persuade, you know, the average person? Because, you know, if you're drafting legislation that's not popular, why would anyone listen to you?
Of course it's important to persuade or to activate the average person. I mean, that's how we have a political climate that's more favorable to the ideas that we believe in. You know, but if the legislation is not attractive, it may not be attractive to one kind of person, but it may be attractive to another kind of person. And you just have to get it in front of the legislator, who is, in our case, I guess, or I guess in the libertarian case, more principled on those kinds of facts rather than someone who's just willing to sell out. I mean, not every piece of legislation is going to be attractive or sexy, but it doesn't need to be that way. It just needs to reverse bad laws or put in safety guards to protect the average citizen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's frustrating because, at least in my experiences, I think that most people listen to emotion more than logic and reasoning, right? I mean, you could use you could have all the evidence in the world, all the logic behind it, but I think people are way more persuaded with, tugging at the heartstrings than anything that involves, intellect, unfortunately.
Well, I think that's, part of the reason why, the Democratic Party has been so successful in the past 50 years is that they've really learned how to reach your average person and communicate their ideas on a level that is really it's really surface. I'm sorry, I'm struggling for words, but if you really dig down into what the Democratic Party is selling, or the new liberal party is not really what the message is. But when you say free healthcare or free college, of course that sounds good. But what it's really, we all know that. So how do we take these ideas of liberty and how do we package them into digestible, relatable, and sexy, I guess, beautiful or attractive ways or messages that will be able to be easily digested by the average person? I think that's one of the things that the Independent Institute struggles with, is we have a wealth of really in-depth knowledge, but the average person is not going to read a 500-page book on urban issues or the California pension policy. We hope you do, but that's not what's happening. So we need to find ways to take the most important parts and give them to people, package them in a way that makes them relatable. How do we do that? That's part of the struggle of our movement.
Yeah, I think it's very hard. And that's one of the reasons I think that a limited government is unrealistic, because no one is going. The average person is not going to know the vast majority of what the government is doing. It takes a lot of effort to know all the laws that are passed. It takes a lot of effort to try to change them and get all the signatures to stop it, right? And very little individual gain for yourself. And so I think government has a lot of leeway to do what they have to do, because they just have to appeal to small little bases and pick different people's pockets and commit bribery, or what the Democrats call compassion or equality or fairness. Not a fan of any of those words. Any words that sound good, I'm not a fan of. But I mean, I think that's the problem in a democracy. I mean, the majority of the people are going to be ignorant. I think Mark Twain was right when he said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect.
I think that you're hitting on an important part here, and this kind of ties into what we were just talking about, and that's these feelings, or no one wants to have to face the fact that we all have to get up every morning and go to work to make money so we can survive in the world. But that's what we all have to do. But no one wants, we don't want to have to do that. If we could get away with not doing it, then we would. And a lot of people do, because that's the way our system is set up. But being uncomfortable is really difficult. But if you really want to be, I guess, fully expressed as a human being, you have to put yourself in difficult situations, and you have to rise to the occasion. And I guess I've been like criticized as being a bootstrap libertarian by my friend Veronica. She tells me, you're one of those people who says, you can do anything, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get out there and do it. And I do believe that, because I think, there are a lot of ways that the system can be stacked against you, but I'm a firm believer that you really can do anything that you want to do. You just have to be dedicated enough and get up every time you fall. And that's difficult for people. And if you're not, equipped to take on those struggles, whether they be mental or physical or monetary, or even with your freedom, if you're not prepared, it's going to be really difficult for you. So I think that the limited government will be, I guess I'm really pessimistic when I look at the future of our government, because I just really think that it's out of control. But I am hopeful that within our small communities that we can affect change. And that's by having people who are principled and dedicated to the individual occupying those kinds of offices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when I don't know how much time you spend speaking with, I guess, people who don't share your mindset, but I mean, first of all, one of the things that pisses me off is, most people criticize an idea and they don't even understand it. Like, I'm not against people criticizing what I believe, but at least understand it first. It's sort of just this smug, self-righteous, waving the hand, dismissal of ideas that they don't see. And I think that people sort of, it's people like feeling better than other people. And I think one of the appeals, and as you pointed out that the Democrats are very good at doing, is making you feel like you're better than other people by standing for the side, because you care about the poor and the weak and the downtrodden. I mean, you had this ridiculous thing where Patricia Arquette, who won Best Actress at the end, says, I want to continue to fight for, equal pay for women. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Do you know how much money? I mean, you just won an award made of gold. You just got $200,000 worth of free stuff in goodie bags. You're wearing hundreds of thousands of dollars of free dress. You live in a gated home. Who the fuck are you to criticize the inequality in wealth? Live it instead of just being a hypocrite.
Yeah. By the way, those clothes and jewelry are rented. They don't get to take those home.
Right, yeah, so they're spending a lot of money and they just rent them.
But I get what you're saying. There's a lot of hypocrisy, and I mean, I came from the left, and so I understand kind of these ideas that we're trying to champion. At least the people that I've run around with from the left, a lot of it is, wanting to champion the political or the social justice movement, and, they want green technology, and who wants to, destroy the earth, those evil oil companies. I think, though, that we have to challenge the status quo, and we have to push against, I guess, these ideologues. Last summer at the Challenge for Liberty that I attended at the Independent Institute before I was brought on, we talked about sweatshops. And, I went into the idea about sweatshops as being this god-awful place where women and children are, forced to work, and, they're not able to, live a good quality of life because they're always working in these awful conditions. But in reality, the people who work in these sweatshops are able to go out and have, 10 times the purchasing power that their neighbors who are not working in the sweatshops are. So I think that it's really interesting that to be able to look at issues from different angles and see that, yes, there might be one humanitarian concern, that there are, poor qualities and conditions in these sweatshops, because there are, but we also have to see the other side of it. And everything, at least this is my philosophy on life, everything has a duality to it. for every positive, there's a negative, right? It's, you know, as simple as a mathematical equation for, so I think that we have to look at both sides and make the decision based on principle and what you're saying earlier, you know, the ethics of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Thomas Sowell said it best. He said, you know, one of the people who, you know, criticize, you know, these programs, you have to ask yourself the question, compared to what? So, you know, I think a lot of these people are spoiled brats. And, you know, no one's saying that sweatshops are good, but, you know, compared to the alternative, what's the alternative? Prostituting themselves, starvation? I mean, if they had better opportunities, they'd take them. So
Are you calling a spoiled brat?
the people who criticize, you know, sweatshops, and the people who, you know, criticize people who are not, you know, living the life that they're living and are in all these bad conditions, and they don't understand that they're lucky and that they're fortunate and that this is not the normal. I mean, you know, a lot of people say, you know, what makes people poor? But we're born poor. You know, at least individually, we're born naked, without any food, without shelter, and we're the rivals for at least, you know, 2 decades of our lives. You become rich over time. Poverty for most of mankind's history was the norm, not wealth. So I think a lot of these people, you know, criticize, you know, not great conditions because they don't know what it's like, and they're living a pretty good life. So to them, you know, they're criticizing it from, you know, everyone should be able to live as well as I do, and it's not the fact that I'm lucky. It's the fact that I'm used to this being the norm. So if people are not living this, there's some injustice that's being done.
Well, we do have kind of, at least from our Western perspective, we have such a different view on the world than other places. And unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to go and travel to another country and see what it's like. But I know when I was working for Berman, he was telling me some of the conditions, you know, in Russia before his family fled. And he was saying that there, people would trade, you know, homemade vodka that they made in their bathtub for toilet paper and basic supplies. And that kind of life is so far removed from, you know, what we live in here in plush America. And, you know, the poorest person in America is still a lot better off than the poorest person in say, like, Cambodia, right? So we need to keep in mind that kind of cultural perspective and bias that we carry around. And, you know, not just when, you know, evaluating ourselves versus other countries and the working conditions and the living conditions, but, you know, when we're interacting with people in an everyday manner. And, you know, we're all privy to our own, you know, self-centric point of view, but there's a lot more going out there besides just us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. So one of the things you said earlier is that your friend called you a bootstrap libertarian, which I guess, you know, I wanted to talk about because it seems we live in this culture where people, you know, celebrate victimization. You know, people, I think, like feeling, you know, downtrodden, so they can, you know, get the pat on the back, and people can say, oh, you know, poor baby, and get the sympathy. You know, I mean, people criticize people who are well off, and they give all this sympathy to people who are not well off when they wonder why are not people more well off. I mean, do you think that we live in this society that's sort of obsessed and celebrates victimization?
Well, I think this goes back to the feelings comment, right? Where, you know, you want to feel like you're on the winning side. And if there's something bad that's happened to you, you know, we may not necessarily want to take ownership of putting ourselves in that position. And I do think that people kind of play up their circumstance. I mean, I don't even, this is the thing though, I don't think a lot of these phenomena are happening on purpose. I think it's just kind of the way that we're conditioned and the way that our society is set up, and also, you know, our brains and the way that they work. And if you never have had a parent, hold you accountable for something, how can we expect that person to go out into the world and take responsibility for their actions when they do something wrong in the world? They're just not going to do it. And I think that, we get into these kind of like self-deprecating cycles as human beings where, something bad happens and then it just seems like everything bad is happening to us, and why is it me? This is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. Instead of saying, how can I find a solution to this problem? I love to say, there's no problems, there's just solutions. I see answers everywhere. You just have to figure out, which is the best course to take. I think it has to do with going back to how we're raised, and peaceful parenting, having the structure. And if you don't have that structure in place when you're a child, you have to be conscientious or self-aware enough to create that structure on your own. And I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be alive, and it's very difficult to be a human. We can pretty much BS our way through a lot of it, but to be like the fully expressed being that you want, it's difficult, and you're going to fall down a lot, but you have to get up and keep going, and you have to find, that it's really just, it's the power within you to create your own destiny.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know if there's solutions. I sort of agree that there are more trade-offs. I think sort of, one of the things that I think a lot of these criticisms that people have of the market is sort of, their nirvana fallacy. That, they don't compare the market with, the real world, but to their ideal government world, So people say, well, we have asymmetric information, so we need government intervention, as if people in government don't have that problem. They don't suffer from asymmetric information. There's no political externalities. There's only negative and positive externalities in the market. I mean, that's not true. People who don't vote get the same leader as people who, ruler, as people who don't vote, as people who do vote. So if the leader does something beneficial, the non-voters get the positive externality of that, or, as is typically the case, if the ruler does something bad, the non-voters suffer the negative externality of that. So people seem to, instead of looking at the real world, have this sort of ideal, and then when the ideal isn't there, they blame instead of not, they don't blame their bad ideas, they blame, society or something like that.
Well, it's always easy to find a scapegoat. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're, a couple of, like middle-class white kids, right? So we haven't had to have, a lot of the struggles that other people have had growing up. And so, I think it's important to take into consideration kind of, a certain amount of privilege that we have and our perspective on it, but at the same time, like you're saying, we're all kind of born at a blank slate, but not necessarily, because our parents, are kind of set up in a system and we come into their lives. So I think it's important for us all to be accountable and to take responsibility for ourselves. And the more that we're able to push off on the government or the system or, each other, the less responsibility that we're taking for ourselves. And really, if your life goes to shit, you have no one to blame for yourself, because you are part of the actions that led up to that point. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't think people are blank slates. I mean, I certainly think that some genetics is involved, and people are not just malleable beings that you could shape into the way you want to shape them. I think people certainly do have, certain genetic characteristics. But I guess the next thing we'll talk about, what is your opinion on, IP? I know working at the the Independent Institute probably has been influential there.
None of my views represent necessarily the views of the Independent Institute.
Are you trying to say? Are you saying this so you can keep your job?
No, I just think it's important to say.
All right.
Throughout this whole conversation, none of my views necessarily reflect that of the Independent Institute. And actually, last year at the Challenge for Liberty, we had a really interesting dialogue going on because one of our lecturers was pro-IP and the other one was kind of anti-IP. And, personally, I think that we should have, information should be free, and if you are the creator of something or if you own something and you want to share it or give it or make it public, then more power to you.
Right. But do you think it should be okay to pirate or copy people's ideas or use their ideas when they don't want you to?
Well, okay, so what is an idea? Is an idea a tangible thing?
What? An idea is something that comes out of your head, right?
So, okay, so are you talking about you're probably talking about like the Pirate Bay or BitTorrent or something like that, right?
Sure. Those are some examples.
Okay, so I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that because you may produce an idea, okay, like like Britney Spears wrote some songs, right? But Britney Spears isn't just making money off of her CD, sales. She's making money off of appearing at places, selling out concerts. She's got a lot of other means of producing capital based on her talents. I think it's kind of petty when artists are asking for their information or for their music to not be shared in these kinds of communities. But I guess it differs, right? I also sat next to an economist who works for Apple. I guess when you're going through litigation for patents, you have to have an economist come and testify on whether what are the real profits and losses based on this intellectual property rights violation, right? And so he's saying that Samsung has, violated this patent, and it has caused, I'm making a number up, $1 billion in real revenue losses for Apple, right? And so I think when it comes to things like software or these more tangible things, it might be a different situation rather than just an idea or a song. But I think then that kind of falls into another realm and it's not just intellectual at that point. It becomes a tangible object. And I mean, come on, everyone has. Who invented the wheel? We don't know who invented the wheel, but everyone's using the wheel, right? And so I think that we get so attached, our ego gets so attached to these different ideas and things that we want to take ownership of. But at some point, it's kind of all of a shared space, this world that we're living in.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I think you can only own things that are rivalrous. That you can only deprive someone else of, and copying is not theft because it creates one more thing. It doesn't deprive anyone of something. But I was with that. Anyway, it was great having you on. Love to do this again sometime. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was lovely being here, and thanks for challenging my mind this evening.
No problem. It was fun. Take care.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye, Daniel.